Welcome everyone to this panel discussion. The title of the panel discussion is Creating a Smart, Sustainable and Circular Plastic Economy in South Africa. And as you all know, South Africa, like the rest of the world, is grappling with the pollution problem. And we have estimations from studies around the world indicating that the plastics in the ocean is going to triple by 2014 compared to the current statistics. So this panel, we've put it together to help us discuss and see how the various interventions can be applied to the South African setup, and also get some perspective from international panelists on how they're handling the situation elsewhere. So I'm going to introduce shortly the panelists. We have Dr. Virendra Kumar Gupta, is the head R&D Polymer and Senior Vice President, Reliance Industries Limited from India. Then we have Dr. Linda Godfrey, who's a CSIR Principal Scientist. Then we also have Kirsten, the project lead on South Africa Plastic Pact. Together with her, we have Oliver Bonstein, also from GreenCape. Then we also have from Plastic SA, Anton Hanekom, who's the Executive Director. And then from DTIC, we have Thokozani Masilela, who's the Director Plastics, Director of Plastics within the DTIC. And then we have from Safripol, the Sustainability Manager, Dr. Avashnee Chetty. So I'm going to go straight to a number of questions that we put forward to the panelists. And I'll start with Dr. Linda Godfrey. So Dr. Linda, in about 5 minutes, please, could you help us understand? You are part of the expert group on breaking the plastic wave study, which is a global study. What were the key findings of the study, and how do you think those findings can be related back to South Africa?
Thanks very much. Thanks, Vincent. Well, I think first of all, to those that are participating in this panel session who are not familiar with the Breaking the Plastic Wave study, maybe I can just spend a minute or so just providing an overview of that. And it essentially stems from the fact that there have been these two schools of thought in terms of how we deal with the plastic waste issue. We know that more and more we're seeing plastic in our oceans, plastic in our environment, and how do we address it? That's been the question that we've been asking ourselves now for the last few years. And there are these two schools of thought. The one school of thought says, well, we need to move towards banning it, we need to change it to alternative materials, we need to reduce consumption of plastic. And there's an opposing school of thought that says, well, ultimately this is just a waste management problem. And if we can put the correct recycling systems in place and the correct waste management systems in place, we can deal with the plastic waste management problem. And so we've had these two opposing schools of thought, but we haven't really had a workable solution. We hadn't actually modeled the system to say, well, is it one of these or is it not? And so for the first time, this global study was done to say, let's actually understand what is the correct mechanism to deal with the leakage of plastic into the ocean. And so this global study was conducted by the Pew Charitable Trust and by Sytemiq. And they essentially looked at, first of all, what is the status quo? What would be business as usual if we actually didn't, if we had no interventions in terms of plastic leakage. And as you said at the beginning, we would expect to see at least a threefold increase in plastic leakage between 2016 and 2040 if it was just business as usual. But then people said, well, it's not going to be business as usual. We know that many countries are looking at putting legislation in place. They're setting targets for extended producer responsibility. So surely that's enough. Surely the new policy interventions that we're seeing coming over the hill will solve this problem. And so this model that was developed, it was essentially they modeled the plastics value chain. This model showed that if we implemented all of the commitments, both the current and the planned short-term commitments to deal with plastic leakage, we would only expect to see a reduction in leakage to the ocean by 7%. So a fairly negligible reduction if you think about it in the greater scheme of things. And then what they did was they modeled these 4 intervention strategies, or these 4 levers potentially that could be pulled. The first one was reduction, secondly substitution, thirdly recycling and disposal. And we can put the slide up, which shows that in fact it's not one or either of those two scenarios that I mentioned at the beginning. You can see from the slide that in fact it's going to require all four interventions. What they did was that they modeled what was the maximum reduction, how far could they push reduction in terms of what consumers would accept in terms of cost to the system. They pushed the substitution wedge as far as they possibly could in terms of what is technically feasible, for example. What would be the impacts in terms of climate change, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of substitution alternatives. And for recycling, technically what is possible, economically what is feasible. And then finally, the more linear landfill option. And it really will require implementing all four of those intervention strategies and implementing them now. It's critical that we take action on this issue now, because delaying action will just further aggravate this problem. So this study clearly showed us that there's no one single solution to dealing with the plastic problem. And so from a South African perspective, the question we're now asking ourselves is, well, this was a global study. This is the intervention strategy at a global level. What should our intervention strategy be? So we're currently in discussion with the team that was involved in this in terms of running this model for South Africa in the foreseeable future, to understand in terms of those four levers, what would it look like for South Africa? Very importantly, the global study showed, it highlighted the role that the informal sector plays, with 58% of the plastic going into the value chain being collected by the informal sector. And we know that they're a key role player in the South African system as well. So there were some really key issues that came out of that global study, which I think sets the scene for the discussion in South Africa in terms of how we deal with plastic, with waste plastic, and certainly with leakage to the environment.
Thank you, Dr. Linda. That's quite interesting insight from that global study. Maybe if I could turn to Anton Hanekom from Plastic SA. The plastic sector came under a lot of pressure as a result of the impact of plastic on receiving environment. What is the South African plastic industry, and in particular the Plastic SA, doing to address the challenges posed by plastics? Do you think these interventions are enough in terms of time and scale to create a smart, sustainable, and circular plastic economy in South Africa?
Yeah, if one look at the last couple of years, plastics have carried the brunt for pollution in the environment. And part of that is because it's visible. From the Plastics SA perspective, we still believe that plastics is one of the most environmentally fit for purpose materials to be used. But then it needs to be collected and it needs to be recycled or reused in that context. Linda touched on some of the challenges that we have, and I would like to maybe just from a South African perspective, just highlight those as well. One of the key things is that we lack infrastructure in South Africa. We also, on an equal basis, do not have proper waste management systems in place. And stats have indicated that we sit with around 34% of South Africans that do not have access to waste management services, be it today or tomorrow or next week. It's just nobody's going to collect their waste. So that in a sense does create some of the challenges that we have. Further, I think as South Africans, we need to change maybe our mindset around waste. We need to see the value of that, and in that context, then deal with it and make sure that it is available for recycling and for reuse. And I think that's just some of the core challenges that we have. Obviously, part of this would be to deal with design for recyclability. We need to look at the design for products. We obviously need to look at recycling content of products and develop maybe new markets where recycled can be used. And at the end of the day, we need to look at the quality of what has been collected, what has been recycled, and what becomes available for the industry to reuse again. So at the end of the day, it's fit for purpose. Let me give you a quick example. If one look at food wastage worldwide, globally we have food wasted of around 1.3 billion tons. And if one just look at the carbon footprint of that, that's equate to about 3.3 million tons of greenhouse gases that's being emitted. In South Africa, the number is around 10 million tons. Now, plastics has been created to deal with food waste and to minimize that. The statistics indicate that by producing food, that will take about 10 times more of resources than to produce the plastic product. And I don't need to go into the benefits of plastic and plastic packaging. I think we all know that it helps us to keep it secure. It indicates tamper-proof and so on. We also know that it extends shelf life. A typical example is the cucumber that will increase a few grams of plastic will increase it with more than 6 days. Bananas will shelf life will increase from 15 days to 36 days. So clearly plastics has a major role to play within our modern life. And given these sort of factors that I've just mentioned, those sort of things need to be considered. If I look at what the industry has been doing, and Plastics SA specifically we've been involved with many projects, many initiatives across the country, across the different value chains. For the industry itself, we created the Operation Clean Sweep. So it starts right at the beginning of the value chain, where we ensure that pallets are not, any pallets that's been wasted doesn't end up in the waterways, but it's collected and been reused. We also have developed 4 river catchment areas or projects. Purpose there is that you really look at the community around the rivers and see how you can impact. And the major pillars of those projects is waste management or infrastructure, education and awareness projects, educating schools and communities and municipalities around the benefits of plastics. Litter prevention, cleanups, that's all part of that. Litter prevention would be things like river booms, socks around waste water outlets, and so on. We're also collaborating quite extensively globally and locally. And locally, the South Coast Project, Ikwazi Izu, is one of the examples where a community with government, with municipalities and industries is working together to develop a project that will not only benefit the community, but that will also clean up the environment. And this is typically a blueprint that we hope for future that we can implement in different other areas as well. We're all aware of the extended producer responsibility that government is busy with developing and putting in place. Plastics has 4 PROs that deals with different plastic waste streams, and a lot of work has been done around that, and targets been set to achieve the objectives that we are setting out. We have also, in January 2019, created the South African Initiative to End Plastic Waste. There we deal with 6 different waste streams. One deals with infrastructure, other one with technology, bioplastics, education awareness, the integration of the informal sector, and then standards and certification. And I think at the end of the day, what one needs to and look at, and coming back to what Linda has said, there needs to be much more collaboration, much more focus. At the moment, different activities, different things that we're dealing with. And I think we missed the main focus, and that is to remove plastics out of the environment. So a lot more collaboration, a lot more taking hands and working with government, working with the civil society, working with industry to find solutions that are scalable for South Africa, for the South African context.
Thank you, Anton. Indeed, I think a lot more collaboration will be required to be able to solve the problem that we have at hand. Now, if we move forward to Dr. Kirsten and Oliver Bornstein from SA Plastic. South Africa recently established a plastic pact, which is one of a number of national pact initiatives under the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And what does South African Plastic Pact aim to achieve? And what are the role of the brand owners and retailers in the responsible management of the plastics in South Africa? Over to you, Dr. Kirsten.
So in terms of the South African Plastics Pact, we are a pre-competitive platform, and we are taking a collaborative approach to design or to facilitate a circular economy for plastics in South Africa. And we have members across the value chain. So from a resin producer has recently indicated their intention to sign, converters, and a number of different companies across the value chain, brand owners, retailers, food service, and recyclers. So, and then our supporting members are very key, and we're thankful to have Plastics SA as a supporting member, and all our PROs, as well as the first municipality in a pact, and the city of Cape Town, and our supporting members are very key towards enabling that landscape. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll jump straight into our aim. So our aim as a plastics pact is to, the big heart is a circular economy for plastics in South Africa. So that's a circular economy in which we see our plastic materials retained within the economy for the highest material value. And therefore, we are able to extract the maximum value. And we see many benefits associated with that, socio-economic as well as environmental. Oliver, I'm going to hand over to you here.
So this image shows the standard representation of a circular economy, and it shows two material loops, namely the reuse and the recycling loops. Our aim as Plastics SA is to grow these loops and to reduce the outflows. So the Pew report on breaking the plastics wave showed a bleak outlook for the environment. And this would happen if we don't intervene in the current state of the plastic waste management system. So with business as usual, over the next 20 years from now, we're headed for twice the amount of current amount of plastic waste generation, 3 times the amount of plastic waste leakage to the ocean, and 4 times the amount of current plastic stock in the ocean. The report also modeled potential ways out of this trouble, and they found that there was no single solution to the problem. A rigorous, multifaceted approach will be required in order to prevent the scenario. We, as the South African Plastics Pact, are working on developing and implementing some of the necessary interventions. The Plastics Pact work is in collaboration, and it's not just locally, but it's across international borders, where we share learnings and best practice to fast track the progress towards our goals. The number of national and regional plastics pacts is growing rapidly. So our collective actions and milestones are guided by our recently publicized roadmap document. This is a dynamic roadmap which responds to changes in the landscape and is available to engage on our website.
So I'll go into a bit more detail on our targets. So in terms of what we aim to do, so as we've said, our heart is a circular economy for plastics, and our initial set of targets to 2025 focus on plastic packaging. And when we say plastic packaging, we're referring to primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging. We recognize, and already as part of our Pact actions, we are looking beyond plastic packaging, but this is our first focus that we see. So in terms of, if we bring up our target slide, what we see is in terms of target 1, is our members have signed to eliminate unnecessary and problematic plastic packaging, and we're defining a number of phases for that. So if we reference back to what Linda mentioned about the interventions required and highlighted in the Pew report, one of that is reduction. So just simply in terms of eliminating what is unnecessary, reevaluating the packaging in terms of supplying a product at the performance required, at the right time, at the right place, it might not need the amount of plastic packaging we currently see. So that is a key point there. And then also this target will also look to substitute materials, which was another point that we are considering. And this might look about like switching within the plastics. And that's something I think we need to highlight as a plastics pact. This is our first target, and it does incorporate reduction, but that's something that we need to work on in greater measure. Our second target looks at 100% of plastic packaging of our membership to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable. So again, here, if we focus on the few actions, what we have here is feedstock for a circular economy. We have plastic cycling and reuse cycles. And in terms of reuse, we have a focus on reuse within a pact because it does retain our plastic material, potentially plastic materials within a very high material value and will then be recyclable at end of life. So we are covering reduction to some degree. We're addressing the recovery and recycling by simply also focusing on the design upstream to make sure our packaging is recyclable. Our target 3 is the only target which is not directly applicable to our members only. So the target 3 is 70% of plastic packaging to be effectively recycled nationally. And what we love about this target is that it just highlights again one of the principles around which we're convened, which is collaboration. And again, Anton and Linda have both emphasized the need for collaboration. So as a plastics pact, we need to work effectively with the broader landscape so that we can achieve our 70% effectively recycled. And to note, this is currently an input recycling rate target. In target 4, we aim to have 30% average recycled content across all our members for their plastic packaging. And here we're considering the demand. So looking at the recycling industry, we're addressing the supply as well as the demand for the product. And that's something that we see in our South African context, that there's much work to be done in terms of that demand side. So just to give you a bit of an overview more in depth onto the aims and the actions, these are publicly communicated targets, and we will be reporting against these targets annually. So thank you, Vincent. In terms of your question, you have highlighted the retailers and brand owners. So I think, as you can see, these are some of our founding business members. As you can see from this slide, we have some of the major retailers and brand owners in South Africa currently within the Pact membership, as well as converters and recyclers. These are our supporting members who are very key in our landscape to support our vision for a circular economy for plastics. And it's our vision as a collective, just to emphasize that. And then on the next slide, we have our recently joined members who are helping magnify that vision. In terms of our retailers and brand owners, and the reason I've put up all our members here is we do see retailers and brand owners as key within the system. But again, we are emphasizing collaboration. And I'll share some examples within the pact that we've already seen. And I think retailers and brand owners have been particularly highlighted presently within our EPR discussions in the country, with the draft regulations having been published, and we're expecting the regulations to be, the full regulations to be published very shortly. And what we see with those discussions from many sectors and from many angles, we've seen retailers and brand owners highlighted as being key to an EPR system because they are the decision makers in the system. They are the ones who have the ultimate decision-making power about what packaging is put on the shelves. And there's also, and I think to emphasize here, we also see our retailers and brand owners as really key in engaging in the system, both to their suppliers as well as to the consumers in terms of responsible choices. And that's something that they can then use to educate in the landscape.
Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting you, but we get very, very good insights from SA Plastic Pact on how you've really rallied a number of stakeholders to solve the topical problem of pollution. Thank you for that. We'll move on to the next panelist. This is Thokozani Masilela from DTIC. We know that the department is currently drafting a master plan for plastics, which is aimed at growing local plastic industry and the South African economy. Can you briefly tell us a bit about the master plan? And do you think there's risk of fragmentation between the different government departments on how plastics is being approached in South Africa? For example, between DEF, yourself, DTIC, as well as the DSI.
Let me just outline the process that we followed in the development of the master plan. As government, we adopted a social compact approach wherein we had envisaged a sort of a reciprocal commitment. The vision that we had set ourselves to achieve, what we're looking at, it's a proactive and adaptive plastic industry that is able to respond fully so to the growing needs of the local and export market, an industry that is able to create jobs, advance transformation, and economic inclusion, and an industry that is able to do so in an environmentally sound manner. Now, insofar as the draft master plan is concerned, because what we've done, I think there are key themes that have emerged through the consultative process, and we just recently concluded regional workshops on the master plan. So the feel that I'm going to give you is it's prior the incorporation of the inputs that we received from the regional workshops. I think one of the key themes that emerged was the localization of the value chain. And I think there are a couple of aspects that we identified. It's import replacement. I can also equally give an example. In this instance, one of the examples could be toothbrushes. And in 2018, we imported toothbrushes to a value of more than 241 million. And I believe we've got a capability in the country, we can do that, right? Two, we're looking at preferential procurement, wherein we want to use government buying power to support industrialization. And number three, under value chain localization, we're looking at buy local. I think it's a campaign that we'll also be embarking on together with Proudly SA and all the key stakeholders. The emphasis is on let's buy local, let's keep the jobs local. The second theme that has been identified is end of life. Presumably this will change, but essentially I think it borders on what Anton had presented and what Linda had raised, what SA Plastic Pact had done. So what we're trying to do is to ensure that there is coordination in what we're doing as a collective. So collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. I think one of the first aspect that had been identified is the extended producer responsibility. I want to expand on that. I think colleagues will know about it. We equally involve in there are a couple of initiatives to end plastic waste into the environment. I think we equally subscribe to the loop system, right? Infrastructure, we do know. I mean, the fact that we've got plastic all over the environment, I think we need to deal with the question of infrastructure. Equally, technology. I think innovation, it's quite key. Technology to deal with the waste collected. We're equally looking at other materials other than your fossil fuel based, your bioplastics, biodegradable and stuff. So we also believe, I mean, education and awareness, I think key to this, how do we then change the behavior of the consumer so that one would have maybe attach value to plastics. Integration, waste speaker integration, I think Anton might also expanded on this, but essentially what we're trying to do also in advancing the agenda of transformation is the integration of this waste speaker as part of the supply chain. Standard and specification, I think that explains itself. One of the other role or that government will also play space in, it's on the industrial financing. I think what we're looking at in order to assist or to also equally improve competitiveness within the industry, which will equally talk to upgrade and developing capability, it's industrial financing. So on that, we'll equally have targets in terms of employment, transformation, and import replacement. Four, it's a polyprop beneficiation. I think this is a program which we currently drive with Sasol. And there are a number of projects that have been identified, and a pre-feasibility on those projects has been concluded, like in the nonwoven space as well. 5, we're looking at testing, research and development. I think essentially to your question, Vincent, this is the capacity, the competency of DSI in the main, but equally we have higher education institutions, and we have also CSIR, which will also assist us in getting into like the development of new products. But what we're looking at here as part of import replacement and how do we improve local capacity and capability, I think we need to play more on the R&D and equally testing. There are certain products which have got a certain claims. So equally, we need to prove that. I think one example, it's a carrier bag, wherein it's being labeled as it's 100% biodegradable. From the policy point of view, or because we don't necessarily have labs and stuff, won't be able to prove that. But collaboration with the likes of CSIR will be able to come up with concrete evidence. And number 6, under the trade environment, I think there's a very problematic tariff code. It's not the only one within plastic. Anton will know more about it because we developed a risk engine to that effect. There's rife in under invoicing, misdeclaration, and equally we need to like enforce the rules of origin. Vincent, in order to, as we're developing the master plan, in order to guard against any policy incoherence or poor coordination, together with DEF and DSI are part of the master plan, and will also play a most important role as part of the task team when we execute the master plan. So coordination, we subscribe to that, coordination. I think we believe that as a collective, with industry and all the role players, will be able to have to record a maximum impact.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roman, for that contribution on the role of science and technology on the problem at hand. And certainly what's still coming out is that collaboration between various stakeholders, government departments, and institutions like CSIR and even the industry is going to be very key in solving the problem. Now, I'll move on to our next panelist, Avashnee, Dr. Avashnee Chetty. Global studies are showing that the only way to effectively deal with leakage of plastics into the environment is to reduce production and consumption. What's Safripol's approach to responsible plastic production, and what is the company's strategy with regards to the future of plastic production? Dr. Avashnee.
So we're a local polymer producer. We're the second largest polymer producer in the country. We are the only producer of PET polymer as well as HDPE, and we're also the second largest producer of polyprop. So, I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation because post-COVID, well, now in the new normal, we had a lot of time to reflect as a business, and we have put sustainability at the forefront of our business, and it's been driven from our executive level to our CEO. So I'm very excited to share the strategy with you today in this forum. And I think for us, sustainability, it's not about greenwashing. It's not a nice to have. It's essential. For us, we need to adopt sustainability as a major focus for our business if we are to re-earn our social license to operate. And I think this is the feeling we are getting, in the industry, from our converters to all of the different stakeholders we engage. There's an urgency, I think, as an industry. There's an urgency to act. There's an urgency to bring about change. And we are seeing the circular economy as, and I'm so glad because all of the previous speakers have already sold the idea of the circular economy. And to us, it's something that we have to adopt if we are to shift the needle, if we are to move the industry forward. Okay, so when we put our strategy together, we obviously looked at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm sure most of us are familiar with these. But this is really the blueprint. If we are to have a better life for all, these are the 17 goals that we have to adopt, and it speaks to things like how do we reduce poverty. How do we bring about equality, gender equality? And some of the things that are critical for our business and for the plastics industry is things like responsible consumption and production. And climate change is obviously centerfold in the Sustainable Development Goals. And what's interesting is that South Africa has obviously signed up to these SDGs, but we now have only 10 years to implement, to act. So this decade that we're in is actually called the decade of change. And it's an opportune time for the plastics industry to come together, bringing together all of these stakeholders to have these discussions, because it's a joint responsibility and we all need to work together towards these goals. And if you look at these SDGs, you can see 17 is actually speaks to partnership. And I think all of the previous speakers have already touched on the importance of partnership for us to achieve these goals. What we've actually identified is 3 critical areas that we feel as a polymer producer, but also as the plastics industry, we feel these will be critical to move the industry forward. And again, it's enhancing the circular economy, which I see now is being discussed and agreed upon, that this is something that is critical for us as the South African industry to adopt. The second one is reducing our environmental impact. And it's a very interesting time to be having this discussion, because we've seen the just transition discussions that are happening at the same time. And this is also a very important topic. And the third one is the socio-economic development. So it's critical for us as a business that if we are to grow economically, we need to ensure that we're doing it with the best interest of the people, the communities in which we operate, but as well as the environment. Okay, so in a nutshell, this is Safripol's sustainability strategy. We've identified these 3 goals. When we look at enhancing the circular economy, we've actually identified 4 focus areas that we will spearhead going forward in the next 5 years. The first one is advancing recycling, design for circularity, reducing plastic leakage, and then renewable feedstocks. And I think when I present this, people are, they're quite alarmed, because when they think of Safripol, they think of us as a predominantly virgin polymer producer. But what we've realized is that if we are still to be around in the next, 10, 20, 30 years, we can't just be a virgin polymer producer. I think we bring to the table a lot of expertise, a lot of operational excellence. We've got operations at scale. We understand the local market. And I think there's a lot more that we can do in terms of enhancing the recycling activities in the country. And we feel we need to be a part of the recycling value chain. So I'm going to speak in the next slide a little bit more about the circular economy and the role that we feel as a polymer producer, the leadership role that we feel we can play there. The second one is reducing our environmental impact. And here we're looking at our critical resource efficiency. So we're looking at our energy consumption, our water usage, and we're putting measures in place to reduce consumption. Critical is also the waste that we generate. So none of the waste that post-industrial waste, none of it goes to landfill, but we're also looking to minimize waste. So as a company and as a business, we are more efficient. The second critical aspect we look in here in terms of how do we transition to a lower carbon economy? And I think this is now very topical. So the one aspect I'm going to speak about in the next slides is about renewable feedstock. But the second aspect, we're looking at renewable energy. So as a polymer producer, our biggest contribution to our greenhouse gas emissions is actually our electricity consumption. So we have now just approved at the board level a project for renewable PV energy, and that we're going to see rolling out in the next financial year. On the socio-economic development, so we do a lot of work in terms of the communities we work in terms of skills, training, bursaries, and we work a lot with the universities as well. But you can see that in our strategy, the foundation of the strategy is actually partnerships for sustainability. And previously, I think as a polymer producer, it was not necessary, if I'm honest, for us to actually engage or collaborate, either upstream or downstream the value chain. But we realize we need new business models, and it cannot just be business as usual. So for us to move on, we need these value chain partnerships.
Thank you very much, Dr. Avashnee, for that contribution from plastic producer. It's quite interesting to hear about your renewable feedstock strategy, and we definitely are going to have more discussions on that in a different forum. We are going to close by the last panelist. This is Dr. Virendra Kumar Gupta from Reliance Industries in India. Now, Dr. Gupta, you bring a different country perspective on plastics, being in India, where bans on single plastics are being considered. What lessons can we learn from India, or from the way the India government is approaching the plastics management? Dr. Gupta.
Thanks, Vincent. Let me bring out the national perspective from the point of view of the plastics. In India, currently, 16 million ton plastics are used annually. And our compound annual growth rate is 9 to 10%. And being the plastic as a versatile material, it is making the life much more easier, and it has become a part of the life. So it means that society needs the plastic, but how do we ensure that the positiveness of the plastic is maintained while some of the negative perceptions or the points can be eliminated? And last few years, the environmental concerns has brought out all the stakeholders in government, non-government, industrial, to come together and address this challenge. When we have looked this as a part of solutions, we have found that there are different areas where all stakeholders need to work. And the first important part in this whole value chain of the circular economy is making the awareness of the, particularly related to littering. Because in a big country, littering is one of the major problem which causes many effects. So there is a way by which we need to ensure that the society are aware of different steps which are need to be taken for better utilization of plastics. The next step, which is very, very important, is a management part. And I think this is where the today major challenges are coming, that the management of the waste plastic is not done at a right manner in many countries. And where in India, where our major focus is, how do we ensure a right kind of waste management from household level to the society level to the city level. And that requires a significant amount of efforts in communications and awareness. So that is the second part which is being done after making awareness related to littering. And government and non-government organizations, they are working together to ensure the waste segregations management is done in a proper manner so that the plastic and non-plastic waste can be segregated. And this is one of the most important challenges. The advancement in technology has allowed us to separate these materials in an easy manner. And once there is a segregation of the plastic waste with the non-plastic waste, the next challenge is how do we bring value to the plastic waste? My fellow panelist has already discussed many ideas and many approaches by which the waste plastic can be repurposed for different applications. There are also different ways to ensure that the plastic can be pyrolyzed back to the fuel. And also, there are ways by which we can use this plastic waste with fillers and other materials to make composites for low value added applications over there. But the way we look at, in addition to all these efforts which are important, I think the way the growth of the plastic is happening globally, and one of the figures is that today 350 million ton plastic is produced, and by 2050 we are going to have 1,100 million ton plastic demand. So this means in next 30 years, the plastic demand is going to be another threefold. Therefore, this circular economic aspect will become a very, very important from the point of view of environmental concern. There is no way we can take a chance that the plastic goes in oceans or get in the landfill. In my opinion, we need to have some disruptive innovations which need to become, in addition to the short-term reduce or recycle and other. And one of the technology disruption which we see, which will come in future, like we move from molecule to polymers, how do we go for polymer back to the monomers in an efficient catalytic manner, which has much more selective as well as economically viable. Today, all the pyrolytic routes, they are very high energy intensive process. So therefore, one of the area which I look at in coming years and where we are also making an efforts, particularly in polyolefin, which is a more than 50% of the total plastic consumed. How do we bring back either to the middle level of fractions of polymer chain or into the monomers, so that it is a much more cost economic, and then we can use it again for making the product. So here the catalytic transformations, newer catalytic systems, which can convert the large molecule into small molecule, going to play a very, very important role. Currently, most of the time we do the pyrolysis at a 400 degree and 500 degree. The challenge is in polyolefins kind of material, can we do the pyrolysis less than 300 degrees temperature? And if this kind of disruptive innovation takes place, then it will be very, very easier in an economical way to bring back the monomers, and then again you go for plastic. Second most important thing which we see as a disruptive innovations, today for different applications, we use a combinations of polymers in a single product. Is it possible to design a product with only one type of polymers? And here, the design of the polymer is going to play an important role. And science has reached to a level where we know what monomers and sequencing plays a role toward controlling the thermal as well as the mechanical properties of the material. So in my opinion, the second disruption which is going to come, and which we are also making an effort to create new materials out of different monomer, which are available to the mankind to create sustainable products.
And with that, I want to thank you to all the panel members for the insightful discussions that we've had this evening. Thank you very much.